Well, let's stay with our top story, and that's on Parliament paving the way for Section 3778 to be struck from the books, while at the same time introducing constitutional amendments to protect the current definition of marriage. And for that, we're going to discuss this with Associate Professor Eugene Tan. He is a constitutional law expert from the School of Law at the Singapore Management University. Prof, the amendment to the Constitution comes in the form of what we just mentioned, Article 156. What is this about?
Jill, we should look at it as part of the package deal. That you have the repeal of 3770, the Penal Code, and to assure, the segment of Singaporeans who are concerned, whether we are moving too fast in terms of social changes and how that could impact upon the institution of marriage. The government has taken the view that, it would be helpful, to have this constitutional amendment. And what this amendment does, in many ways, it seeks to clarify, that Parliament ultimately decides what is a marriage, right? So in short, Parliament will define what a marriage is. It also has that protective function, in my view, right? It maintains the status quo of what is a marriage. So I think that's important because I think Singaporeans, while they would want 377A to be repealed, they're also mindful about whether that could unleash social changes which Singapore and Singaporeans may not be prepared for. Mm-hmm. So I see Article 156, the proposed Article 156, as an attempt, to manage the pace of social change, while also making progressive efforts, to reduce discrimination against the LGBT community.
Mm-hmm. So, Professor Tan, Article 156, explain to us something about the process of this. It's a new article, as it were.
Yeah, it is.
So why does it have to come in this specific form?
Well, I think this specific form, I think when you're referring to it, it seeks to, as I mentioned, right, to have that clarifying function, that protective function. But I think it has that, it comes from the view that the concern that marriage, there could be legal contests to broaden the definition of marriage, to go beyond what is currently a union between a man and a woman, that there could be that push, towards civil unions or same-sex marriage. So Article 156, I think, seeks to assure Singaporeans that the status quo is being maintained, but it doesn't enshrine it. It doesn't hard code into the Constitution, that marriage is between a man and a woman. In fact, when you look at the provision itself, it doesn't directly define what a marriage is. Instead, it says, Parliament will decide. And as of today, right, all this while, Parliament has determined what marriage is, through the Women's Charter, read with the Interpretation Act, which provides for marriages being between a man and a woman. So the need to put in a constitution, I think it's a way of trying to assure Singaporeans. But it also provides that room, that eventually if Singaporeans are, one day, if we are ready for other forms of marriages beyond one man and one woman, that could also come about, but it must come through a deliberate, considered political process.
You brought up a really good point because there is that but that the government, as you mentioned, is not going to take the approach of enshrining that definition of marriage as between a man and a woman into Constitution. How would you want people to be reading this?
I think the one way to look at the proposed changes, right, is that it doesn't change the status quo, right? So the definition of marriage remains as a union between a man and a woman. It doesn't change our existing laws and policies, that are premised on this definition of marriage between a man and a woman, right, as well as other policies, right? So whether that relates to public housing entitlement, whether that relates to adoption policies, media regulations, as well as, education, particularly sexuality education in schools. All that, remains unchanged. So I think, much as we can get into the legal niceties of this constitutional amendment, I think the takeaway really is that it maintains the status quo, right? But it also provides, for the opportunity for the definition of marriage to change, but it would require the government of the day to be able to use the political process, engage and consult with Singaporeans, get the requisite parliamentary approval, but also win the public support. So I think here, the government's position, as I see it, is that they don't want to tie the hands of future generations, as well as the hands of future governments. And I think that's a pragmatic approach. I think we shouldn't elevate, the status of marriage way beyond what is necessary. And I think, the provision as it is drafted does try to deal with the concerns, I think, in a fairly even-handed way.
I think perhaps the government is cognizant of the fact that society does change. There are certain laws and rules for certain specific times. I mean, society is an evolving animal, as it were. But some might be wondering why these two bills. I mean, they're going to be tabled together. They will be debated as well. Tell us why they have been tabled together, and whether the sequence of debates, what will it be like? What can we expect?
Yeah. So they're tabled together because I think, it is a package deal, right? I know the word doesn't sound very nice, but it's one way of trying to ensure that this move to repeal 377A, will be able to get the support of large segments of Singaporeans. The way the bills have been tabled today for its first reading, suggests that the government will repeal 377A first. And at the same sitting next month in November, they will also then debate this constitutional amendment, right, which is essentially addition of a new provision in the Constitution. I think 377A repeal will be fairly straightforward. I don't expect there to be significant controversy. I think most of all the political parties, recognize that society has evolved. People recognize, that there isn't a need to criminalize, consensual sexual activity between two men. But I think the debate will really lie with regard to the constitutional amendment, right? The question of whether it goes far enough. Will it be sufficient, to stave off challenges, for what has been described as marriage equality? But we must also bear in mind that the amendment to the Penal Code, right, taking out 377A, simply only requires a simple majority of MPs present and voting. But the constitutional amendment would require, 2/3 of elected as well as non-constituency MPs voting in favour of it. So the constitutional amendment has a much higher threshold. The PAP has indicated that, they will certainly prevail, but I think the question will be, whether they will prevail in the court of public opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do want to thank you for your insights today, coming here and speaking with us. We've been talking to Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the School of Law at the Singapore Management University. Thank you.